Okay, I don't want to keep the people that have joined waiting, and we've got a lot of materials to cover, so why don't we kick things off?
Yep.
Well, welcome to the Bizibuz webinar on child sleep issues. Thank you for joining us today. I'm a Hong Kong parent of 2 children, so I'm interested in today's session myself. Unfortunately, children's sleeping habits can cause a lot of frustration for bubs right through to primary age kids, and have repercussions on mood, attention span, and educational engagement. And then, of course, there's the impact on the rest of the household. Let's face it, without enough sleep, we all become tall 2-year-olds. We're now kicking off the new school year, so we wanted to ensure everyone's kids get off to the brightest start possible, whether at playgroups or primary, and we hope you find this sleep webinar of great help. I'm also the founder of Bizibuz, which is an after-school platform for parents. We use technology to help parents make more optimal activity selections, and then we automate the management of those activities. We also love working with child experts to bring parents practical advice on how to ensure their children blossom to the fullest extent. If you're interested in joining our community, please follow the links now pasted on the chat area. I'd like to welcome Gemma Fisk, who is a certified infant and adult sleep consultant based in Hong Kong. Gemma speaks from both professional and personal experience, given her eldest daughter suffered sleep issues as a baby, and she's helped hundreds of families enjoy a much better night's rest. She works as a freelancer and also has a dedicated role helping parents that come to her through Joint Dynamics, which is a clinic that addresses a broad range of wellness issues from joint problems to nutrition, psychology, and sleep. Just one more housekeeping item before we start. If you're interested to ask Gemma questions, please go to the icon that looks like a triangle, square, and circle in the lower right-hand side of your screen. We've actually disabled the chat function, so you won't be able to use the normal messaging, but you can definitely go to this area and you can type Gemma questions, and at the end of the webinar, we'll be opening up the session and taking these questions. So with that, Gemma, let's start by having you walk us through your own background and experience and the sort of sleeping issues you've encountered in the children of Hong Kong.
Sure. I'm just going to open up my presentation so you can see this part. You have to tell me if you can see my screen.
It's coming through now.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on. So as Christy explained, my name's Gemma. I'm an infant and adult sleep coach. I'm based in Hong Kong. I also specialize in insomnia, so cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia for adults. So I've been lucky to work with a lot of families in Hong Kong with babies from newborn to 6 years, but I'm also able to offer these sleep services for beyond that and into adulthood too. So a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to discuss the importance of sleep and why we sleep to function day to day, how much sleep our children need and the impacts of not meeting their sleep needs, identifying sleep disorders and which ones you can prevent, because there are a few that can actually be prevented, sleep hygiene and sleep associations, and then we've got a bit of a slide on should you sleep train, and I'd love to hear some views on that if anyone's open to sharing, and then like Christy said, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So a little bit about me. I'm a mother as well. I have Lila, who is now 4, and Ivy, who is 1. My 4-year-old was the drive to start this business. I used to breastfeed Lila to sleep, which meant that she would never complete more than a sleep cycle of 45 minutes before calling me back in to feed her back to sleep again. So you can imagine after a few nights of this, I was extremely broken, like a lot of mothers, and actually didn't really feel like I was offering my best self to my child, just because I was so sleep deprived. So looking into studying sleep and actually going down the route of sleep training really changed my life and my view of being a mother. As a result, Ivy sleeps wonderfully, but I did things very differently from the second I brought her back from hospital. So I have a business. I'm the owner of Sleeping Beauties and the Sleep Coach Hong Kong, but I also work with Joint Dynamics, specifically the Evolve team, who focus on women's health. There's a really lovely crossover between us. So I believe in sleep science. That's the way I've studied. But being a mother, I also have more of an emotional side. I don't believe in any harsh sleep techniques such as quiet out. It's all gentle sleep training, if any. So why do we sleep? Sleep is vital for cognitive and emotional health. If we sleep better, we have better emotional control. So for toddlers and young children who struggle with emotional control anyways, being told no and they can't have something and, you know, kicking off, I'm sure everyone's experienced that at some point. That's actually even harder for them to understand and regulate if they've not had enough sleep. You might find as an adult, if you haven't slept very well, that you feel a lot more emotional the next day, perhaps more tearful than you would usually, or you fly off a handle at something more than you wouldn't normally if you'd slept well. So better sleep, better emotional control. We also need good sleep for growth hormones. So our babies do the most growth they'll ever do in their whole lives when they're between 0 and 4 months in those newborn stages. So sleep is so important for their growth, particularly at that point, and that's why newborns sleep so much. But they also continue a lot of growth until the age of 2. After 2, of course, they continue to grow. They do get bigger, they do develop, but it just slows down a little bit. And as a result, sleep also isn't quite as needed. Of course, it's still needed, but not to the same amount as an under 2 needs. Cell division and replenishment, which plays a role in improved immunity. So I can tell you that if you've slept for, again, as an adult, I don't have statistics for children, but if you've slept for 6 hours or less, the day after, your chances of catching a cold are then 300% more likely, which is huge. And you know, when kids are they're snotty, they're always catching things at school, sore throats, colds, and you know, bad sleep is going to mean that there's even more germs going around. Memory consolidation, so it's like hitting the save button. If we've slept well and our brains have had that detox and that emotional cleanse, it means that they can become more sponge-like, so we can absorb more information. So before going to school, or you know, when they're very little, they're learning, you know, very basic things like walking and talking and crawling. But if their brains are more sponge-like, then they can absorb all that information, and then a good sleep afterwards is like hitting the save button. In our REM sleep, which we're going to talk about in a bit, is when we do all of our memory consolidating, and it's key for learning. And that REM sleep, the most of it, majority, comes at the end of our sleep. So at the early hours of the morning, which is why having a nice long sleep is so important when it comes to our children learning and memory. So we said that sleep is like a brain detox. It cleanses the buildup of unwanted chemicals. So this is also within our bodies. We can't always control what ends up in our bodies, in our children's bodies. We can check the back of bottles and labels and try our very hardest, but really, you know, there's chemicals on our food, our shampoo, our sun cream, you know, so eventually these chemicals unfortunately do find our way into our bodies. So a good sleep is a good physical detox of these chemicals to prevent any buildups. And then finally, restoration gives our brains and body a good rest, which I'm sure everyone is aware. So just following on from that, here's a fact that I thought you'd find very interesting. So a study showed that children getting less than 10 hours of sleep per night at 2.5 years old were 3 times more likely to have low receptive language skills. And that's regardless of daytime sleep. I think that is particularly important because to us, 10 hours does still seem like a lot of time, but to even a 2.5-year-old, it's just not enough. And this is regardless of what they're doing during the day in terms of sleep. They really need a lot more than that.
Gemma, can I just ask on that question, regardless of daytime sleep, is that because a nap is worth less than sleeping at night for even young kids?
Yeah, good question. It's because they get a lot more deeper restorative sleep at night. and that's when we're going to do a lot more memory consolidating, and it's going to help with the learning as well, development.
Because it's interesting, my kids went to a Montessori kindergarten, and there we were told from even really young ages they should not be napping during the day, and instead we should be trying to extend their night sleep. Have you heard that sort of thing?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I do say that we should keep the nap until at least 3.5, because they do need that nap still. But I mean, it's correct in a sense, because nighttime sleep does always take priority. It is the most important over naps. But I wouldn't say to drop the nap any sooner than 3 or 3.5.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
No worries. So this is a sleep cycle. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but this is what sleep cycles look like for children above 4 months and also for adults. They just vary in length. So when we first fall asleep, we enter into stage 1, which is the lightest sleep. That's sort of when you're nodding off, you can see your child's eyes just starting to close, and they're slowly slipping into stage 1 sleep. And they can be very easily awakened at this point. So if you let your child perhaps fall asleep in your arms, and after 5 minutes or sooner you try to transfer them into the bed and they wake up, it's because they're still in a very light phase of sleep, and they can be very easily woken up. They then move through to stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and it gets gradually deeper and deeper. So stage 4 is the deepest phase of sleep, and this is when our bodies do the most growth and physical repair. So to any physical exercise, I mean, children are always running around or scraping a knee or anything like that. So any replenishment would happen during this phase. The last phase in the sleep cycle is when REM sleep happens. REM stands for rapid eye movement, and it's when we do our dreaming. And breathing becomes more rapid. There's a lot more eye movement, so you might even see the eyelids flicker during this point, and it's a really essential part of the sleep cycle. If a child's below 4 months, they still have sleep cycles, but they don't look like this. They're a bit more irregular. They come in what we call sleep bursts, and they vary in length. But once the child hits 4 months, then it turns into a sleep cycle like this, which is where the 4-month sleep regression comes from. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that. A lot of people have dreaded it, and it's a very difficult time. But it's basically, your child is progressing, and they just need to learn to connect those sleep cycles in order to sleep better and longer. When the child then becomes closer to 3, the sleep cycle will be around 60 minutes in length from 45, and then at 5 years it will go to 90 minutes in length, and it will remain that length all the way through to adulthood. So if you have a baby you're on this call and you have a baby and they sleep for 30 minutes or less, then it's likely that they are struggling to transition from deep sleep into REM sleep. And that's a very frustrating but common time for these little cat naps to finish at 30 minutes. And that can be caused from overtiredness. So if the child has gone to bed and they are overtired, or there's been a little bit too much awake time between naps or waking up in the first nap, then we're going to see a short 30-minute cat nap, as opposed to a nice long 45-minute sleep cycle or longer. So this is a table of sleep needs going from 0 to 6 years. Don't worry, I'll be giving some information for children above 6 years. But I recommend just having a little look along here now, and if any of these ages are relevant to your child, just taking note and writing them down. I've worked with this graph for 4 years, and I have to say it's applicable to almost every child I've worked with. A lot of parents are quite surprised at how much sleep their child needs, but once they are getting it and reaching it, they quickly realise that it is the best amount at that age. So you can see how it's slowly decreases the needs as they get older, as we spoke about before, in terms of growth and development. That would be why. And you can see at the top here, this is how much nighttime sleep they should be getting. In the yellow is how much daytime sleep they should be getting. The pink along the bottom is any naps or quiet time they should be getting. And then the most important bit is actually the dark blue, the wakeful window. And these are particularly important for children aged 3 or below, because that's when they're still taking their naps. So if a wakeful window is extended, it basically means your child has been awake for too long, longer than their bodies can actually cope with. And when they are extremely tired, their bodies become stressed. So it releases the cortisol hormone into the bloodstream, which then makes their brains think that they are unsafe. Which means that the next nap is either really, really hard, or it means that there's going to be disruptive sleep or early rising. So if you're experiencing any of those things, I strongly recommend having a look at the wakeful windows and making sure that they're always kept within that time. If you have a child that's above 6 years, so between 6 and 13 years, your child needs to be getting between 9 and 10 hours and 45 minutes of sleep at night. Very specific. And then if they're above 13 to 17, they need to be getting between 9 and 11 hours, 8 and 10 hours of sleep each night.
Can I just ask, what are the things parents should avoid during quiet time? And there are very specific do's and don'ts.
Yes, no, great question. So a quiet time should definitely still be taken for as long as you can manage it, even in adulthood. If you've got time to take some quiet time and give your brain a bit of a time out, as opposed to being stimulated, engaged from the second you wake up to the second you go to bed, it's very beneficial. So I would still, if you can, I'd still recommend putting your child in their bedroom to take it. If not, just a quiet area of the house where the lights can be down low, it's quiet, it's cool, it's comfortable, and activities could be a jigsaw, some reading, an audiobook is also lovely. Anything that's going to keep them quiet and nothing too engaging. I think it's quite tempting to pass the iPad or put them in front of the telly, and I mean sometimes that is the only option when we've got very active children, and I don't blame anyone for having to resort to that. But if they've got a screen in front of them, it's keeping their nervous system on high alert. So although it's giving them a physical rest, it's not actually resting their brains at all. If you really can't get your child to sit still and the iPad really is the last resort, then consider a program that's perhaps a little bit more relaxed. I don't know if anyone's heard of Guess How Much I Love You. You can get that on YouTube. It's really sweet. Yeah. And rock we like. Just something more chilled and that could even encourage them to sleep whilst they're watching. That's the next best thing. But yeah, keep quiet time for as long as you can. At school, that's a bit harder. That's up to the school to sort that at the weekend for sure. Okay, sleep disorders. So first up, parasomnias. So you might have heard of most of these. Sleepwalking, confusional arousals, night terrors, sleep talking, and nightmare disorder. So I expect that most of you have heard of most of these on there, possibly apart from confusional arousals, apart from my sleep client that's on this call. Hopefully she remembers what that is. So a confusional arousal is basically when a child is stuck between being asleep and being awake. And it usually happens in the first part of the night, so anytime between bedtime and midnight usually. And you'll hear your child cry out and you'll possibly assume it's a night terror because it's a real screech, it's a real cry. And when you go in to see them and check they're okay, they'll either still have their eyes closed or their eyes will be open but glazed, almost like they're looking through you. and that is because they're stuck between the state of being asleep and being awake. They're so common, and they're caused from overtiredness. A lot of people just assume they're night terrors, but most likely it's a confusional arousal. They're not damaging, they're not going to cause trauma. Your child won't even remember them the next day, but it's just a bit of an alert for us as parents to think, okay, I think we might need to shorten wakeful time tomorrow, or try and get to bed a little bit earlier, or maybe try and get a nap in if your child doesn't usually nap, or a longer nap if they do usually nap. A little key as to whether your child's experiencing nightmares or confusional arousals or night terrors is what time of night they're waking up and they seem disturbed. So if it's, like I said, before midnight, that's when it's more likely to be a confusional arousal or a night terror. If it's after midnight, then that's more likely to be a nightmare. And the reason is we do most of our dreaming in the second half of the night, and a nightmare is essentially a bad dream. And a nightmare will be remembered the next day. So, you know, if your child wants to talk about it, then that's great. It's not something we can prevent, nightmares. They're really normal, as long as they're not happening every single night, but it's just us processing what's happened recently. So perhaps there's been something that's happened at school, or something that's upset them, or maybe they've fallen off their scooter. You know, their brains are basically going to relive that and digest what's happening as a safety mechanism, so that we don't then repeat the same thing again. So those are parasomnias. Of all of those, confusional arousals are the part that we can prevent. Circadian rhythm disorder. So our circadian rhythms are our internal body clocks. They help us to establish between day and night, which is particularly important if you have a really young baby, making sure that they are exposed to light only during the day and complete darkness at night. Their independent circadian rhythm will be developing at around 8 weeks. So from that point, that's when you can really start putting a bit more of a structure and a routine in place for the baby. Jet lag also is a part of a circadian rhythm disorder. It's only obviously a minor one, and something that is very temporary. And then delayed sleep phase disorder, or again, advanced sleep phase disorder. It's basically taking an early bird and a night owl, but to the complete extreme. So a person with advanced sleep phase disorder will wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, ready to start their day. And a person with delayed sleep phase disorder could still be wide awake at midnight and ready to work still at this point, and not actually feel slightly sleepy until 2 a.m. If the adult or the parent experiences advanced or sleep phase disorder, it's quite likely the child will as well. If anyone suspects their child is suffering with this, then let me know, and I can give you some advice. Rhythmic movement disorder, RMD. So this is head banging, body rocking, head rolling, body rolling. Babies often shake their heads as a form of movement to get to sleep, which is why they end up with that little bald patch on the back of their heads, you might have noticed. It's very cute. It's normal. The only time that I would suggest to get it investigated is if your child is 5 years or older and they're still doing it. But below that age, really common, and a lot of my clients have children that need some form of movement that they just do themselves to send them off to sleep. Obstructive sleep apnea, OSA. So this is when the tonsils or adenoids are too big. The symptoms include sweating, snoring, restlessness, and sitting up a lot. There's a few different types of sleep apnea. The obstructive one is the one that is most common in children. So usually you will know if they've got it, because the snoring will be really quite loud, and it will also be worse when they're lying on their backs. Sometimes it sorts itself out. Sometimes as the child gets bigger and their heads and their necks form, then the tonsils and adenoids aren't too big anymore. But if they're past 4 or 5 and it's still an issue, or if you're noticing excessive sleepiness the next day, then I definitely recommend going to see an ENT specialist who can advise you on next steps to take. It's very frustrating for the child who's just desperate to sleep and constantly being woken up during the night by gasping for breath.
Gemma, can I ask, out of all of these disorders, are there, I know you said RMD and OSA may occur at a certain stage and be totally normal, and then a child can overcome them on their own. When does a parent know if these are issues that just won't resolve themselves, and then they should go and actually seek some expert help?
If your child's having repeated nightmares at any age, so consecutive nightmares, or they're happening more than a couple of times a week, then that's when I definitely recommend reaching out. If your child's hit adolescence and they're still sleepwalking or sleep talking, then again I would suggest looking for some additional help. If you think they're suffering from the advanced or delayed sleep phase disorder, and that is, it's not just waking at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and being awake, it's excessive, 4 o'clock ready to start the day, then again, that's something to then start seeking. And then the rhythmic movement disorder after 5 years, and obstructive sleep apnea, you could seek help at any point with that, because it can cause excessive sleepiness during the day. But if it seems minor, and it just sounds like they're snoring very loudly, then I would wait until around 4, because that's usually when it sorts itself out. And if it hasn't, then go and get some another opinion. Sleep hygiene. So a lot of this also applies to adults, so please take note. Ideally, we want the room temperature to be between 18 and 22 degrees. That would be dressed in long sleeve pajamas with a sleep sack of 1 to 2 tog, if your child is still in a sleep sack. The general rule when it comes to the temperature of the room is a cool environment, warm body. Nice and snug. We're very lucky to have air conditioning here, which makes that a little bit easier. But yeah, it helps them to be snug. If you are unsure if your baby is too hot or too cold, never go by the hands or the feet. You always want to check the back of the neck, and if that feels sweaty or not. Often our limbs can feel a very different temperature to what we actually are. So for sleep safety, you want to be placing your baby on his back with feet at the end of the cot. No blankets or toys should be present in the cot to prevent SIDS. And you want to keep your child in a cot until they're at least 2.5 years old. And that's because the child doesn't actually understand, they don't have the cognitive ability to understand the concept of staying in bed until they're at least 2.5 or 3 years old. So if you make that transition a little bit too early, you might end up with a child that just gets out of bed repeatedly. And of course, when they come out of bed, they're going to come and find mummy and daddy. So you'll get a visitor many times during the night. So just keep them in a cot for as long as you possibly can. Keep the room cave dark. So look at some blackout blinds, even black paper stuck to the windows with some blue tack or some tape. And invest in a grow blind for traveling. I've used mine so much. Well, maybe not in the last few years because there's been lack of travel, but when we were traveling, I brought it with me everywhere. It's really useful. Sleep associations and co-sleeping. So a sleep association is when the child learns to associate falling asleep with a comfort item or a parent or an activity. So this could be being rocked, being cuddled, being fed to sleep, patted to sleep, bounced to sleep, sung to sleep. All these things the child needs in order to fall asleep or fall back to sleep. We have negative and positive sleep associations. So I would say a negative sleep association is perhaps being rocked to sleep or fed to sleep, because that's something that an adult needs to be present for. But a positive sleep association could perhaps be the pacifier or a dummy if your child can replace it themselves, or an association perhaps with the white noise machine or a little lovey, because that's just something you can give to them at the beginning of the night. And if they wake up during the night, they can just reach back for it themselves and feel comforted with that. If the child wakes fully in the night, he will likely seek the same help to reinitiate sleep. So you might remember me saying at the beginning of this that my firstborn Lila, I used to breastfeed her to sleep. So when she was waking up after her 45-minute sleep cycle, she was then, I don't know how to fall back to sleep again, calling out for me, and then I would have to breastfeed her again to get her back to sleep, which I think most of us possibly wouldn't mind if it's just once or twice, but it's a 45-minute sleep cycle. That's waking up a lot to put them back to sleep, which is really, really tough. Co-sleeping, I have a lot of parents that come to me and say, I co-sleep, is that okay? And my answer is, if it's okay with you, then I think that's fine. From a safety perspective, you know, we should be aware that it's not recommended, especially for really young babies, but it's not, co-sleeping isn't necessarily negative unless it prevents the family from sleeping, or it's having a negative impact on the parental relationship. So if it's something that you want to come away from, something I can help you with, but only if you feel ready to do that. Sleep training, a controversial topic. Some people are dead against it. Some people I don't think really fully understand what it is, and some people swear by it. There are so many different techniques and methods. It's not the #1 go-to unless a child has a sleep association. If there's a sleep association, like I explained previously, then you might want to look at a gentle sleep training technique to bring them away from needing that in order to fall asleep. However, if you just want to maximize their sleep and feel they could be getting better naps, then there's lots of other things we can look at, from environment to nutrition to routine and to activities that are happening throughout the day, any medical issues. You know, this is why we need to look at things holistically. If you want a sleep training technique, all you need to do is type it in the internet and many will come up, or there's hundreds and hundreds of books on sleep that could share these with you. But I would just recommend that you choose the one that is most suited to your child, their temperament, their personality, their age, but also one that's going to suit your family. Because if you choose to go down the route of perhaps a technique that is a little harsher, and when I say harsher, I mean leaving the child, and you can't see that through as the parent, the child will sense that you're not comfortable, and it will just, it could just frighten them more. And then if you then cave after perhaps doing it for an hour, you've then sleep trained your child to cry in order for you to come in to check on them. So choosing the right technique is really important, and that's a key part of my role as well, understanding the family, understanding the child, and then helping them to choose the right method. So I've put down here, absolutely no judgment to anybody who has ever tried cry out, because I've been sleep deprived before, and if someone said to me, this is 100% going to work, I would have done it too. But it's just not advised, because there's research that's shown that a child that's left to cry for long periods at a time on a frequent basis could develop attachment issues. If you've tried it once or twice, I'm sure there was no damage done, but you basically, your child stops crying for you because they think they've been abandoned, and a study that's been done shows that their stress levels, even though they've stopped crying, are still very high, but when they've been left. So it's just nice to choose a more gentle technique, possibly that involves staying with the child so that they feel happy, we feel confident that they're safe and they're comfortable within their sleep space, so that they can just drift off peacefully without any stress.
Gemma, I'm just, in the interest of time, want to let you know it's now 1:05, and we've got a few questions to get to. So I'll let you finish, but I just wanted you to be aware.
No, thanks, Christy. I actually just saw it pop up 1:05. I think this is my last one. Yes, this is my last one. There we go. So just a note on routine and consistency. So your bedtime routine should last between 45 minutes to 1 hour. And during that time, the most perfect order is bath, feed, book, bed. So the bath at the beginning of the routine helps to relax their muscles, when they come out of the bath, it helps their body temperatures to drop, which we need in order to initiate sleep. And then putting the book between feet and bed breaks any form of feed to sleep association. And if these steps could all be done in their sleep space, in dim lighting, quiet voices, without other parents wandering in and out, then that's perfect. It's nice and relaxing for the child. And then no TV or iPad should be used within 90 minutes of bedtime. So because the blue light that's projected off the screen it can mimic daylight too well. And we don't want the child to think that it's time to be awake, because it's time to go to sleep. And that's it. There we go.
Details. Okay, great. Well, let's jump into the questions. We've got one from Han. Actually, I think we've got two from Han. My 14-month-old is always rolling or sitting upright during his sleep. Most of the time, he can continue sleeping on his own. Is it normal?
Rolling,
sitting upright.
Okay. So that could be a symptom of obstructive sleep apnea if he's feeling the need to sit up, because when they're lying on their backs, that's when it's harder for them to breathe during the night. So I would be asking if there's any obstructive sleep apnea in the family, and also looking at his weight. Yeah. I mean, feel free to reach out independently if you want to discuss that in a little bit more depth. But and I can refer you to an ENT specialist if you want the name of a good one.
Okay, and there's another question as well. How can I break the feed to sleep habit for breastfeeding a 14-month-old? He's always awake at 5 a.m. and crying for milk. I think it's a true hunger need. I tried to feed more milk before he sleeps, but he refuses to drink. Okay.
So when a child gets to 8 kgs, that's when you can feel confident that a night feed is no longer required. So when they get to 8 kgs, they're usually between 7 and 9 months. If it's genuine hunger, I would be looking at the diet during the day. How much is he getting during the day? Making sure he's not underweight or anything. And if he could be thirsty. With air conditioning, sometimes children that sleep with their mouth slightly open, it can mean that their throats get very dry. So it could then make us think as parents, once you've given them milk and they're guzzling it, that they're hungry, but actually it could be due to thirst.
Okay. Here's another one. My son is 24 months old now, sleep trained. Most of the time he sleeps through the night. We're going to travel overseas now to Europe. I'd love to know the answer to this question as well. Any tips for flights adjusting to jet lag?
Yes. I've just done this myself because we went to England. So when it comes to jet lag, there's no magic cure. Typically, how many hours of time zone change there are is a day. So for the UK, for example, it's a 7-hour time difference. So typically it would take 7 days to get over it. The best way is to think that our circadian rhythms, our inner body clocks, are governed by light, darkness, and meal times. So once you're on that flight, don't stress about what time it is. Just survive the flight. You've got a 24-month-old. That's going to be hard enough as it is. But once you get to the other end, change your clock to local time and go off the routine that you would have always done, but on that local time, if that makes sense. So keep that nap at perhaps 12:30 for a 24-month-old, bedtime at the same time, perhaps 7, and meal times at the same time. When you put them to bed, that's likely to obviously be a different time to what they're used to in Hong Kong, and they might be hungry during the night, especially at that age. So if they are hungry and they're demanding food, it's okay to give them something to snack on, but just make sure that it's something very bland, absolutely no sugar or anything like that. Things like crackers or something like that, that's just going to keep them going. And when you're feeding them, keep the lights down low so that their bodies think that it's sleep time. It's not time to be awake.
Okay, great. Final question. Is there any particular reason why some babies, toddlers, are good or bad sleepers? is it genetic, or is it because there was something wrong the parents did when the child was a newborn? I think you can from personal experience about this, because it sounds like your two daughters have, you know, quite a different sleep behavior.
Yes, yes, and their personalities are completely different as well. I don't believe it's anything that a parent has done. I've met children that sleep through the night at 2 weeks old. I've met children that have never slept through the night at 6 years old. So it's every parent's decision whether they want to sleep train or not. But there are just some children that are a bit more sensitive. I mean, I can say this about Lila for sure, my 4-year-old. She's quite a shy, quite a reserved character, perhaps. She just needs mummy a little bit more, whereas Ivy's a lot more independent and she can just roll over and go to sleep. So I don't think it's anything that anybody does. It's just the way that the child's temperament is. But that's why, and when I said choosing the right technique, is just so important for the child, and something that suits them.
Okay, great. Gemma, thank you so much for all your insights on child sleep issues. We hope the parents found this webinar helpful and the advice really helps to achieve more restful nights. Please remember to sign up if you'd like to receive more parenting tips or webinars. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Gemma.
Thank you.